Hello everyone, my name is Paul and welcome back to the new news. I hope that you all are having a great day. I hope that you guys are safe, that your family, that your friends are safe, and I hope that you guys will forgive us a ton of news. Obviously, again today, the fact that we got those news sources is really being a game changer right now, but it is a lot to sort through. That being said, there's obviously a lot of stuff happening throughout the world, and not a lot of it is necessarily good stuff. That's why we always, specifically look for something uplifting. And that's because there's a lot of crises going on, whether you're talking about war, conflict, terrorism, whether you're talking about ethnic cleansing, genocide, you're talking about whatever. You can also, just think of the environmental impacts throughout the world. Things that have nothing to do with those kind of, wars and that kind of thing, but things like droughts and famine, and it's affecting millions of people worldwide. So be sure to check out in the description below of all of the different organizations that are down there. We have a bunch for Ukraine, of course, being the main topic currently, but please don't forget the other locations too: Ethiopia, Somalia, Southeast Asia. These places are heavily affected by very serious environmental issues, droughts, and famine. They're already regions that are at risk and have food and water insecurities as is, and required large amounts of humanitarian aid, which unfortunately, because of the war in Ukraine, was diverted. And because of the lack of grain exports out of Ukraine at this point in time, that grain is actually, a lot of Ukrainian grain is actually used for humanitarian aid. Most people's rations have been cut globally as a result, and people are, it's not a very good time. So luckily you guys have made this an awesome community, and you've made it so that way we can be the news that gives back, and I hope that can continue. I'm really happy about the support that you guys have given us and the staff team and the organizations, most importantly, and I really hope that will continue into the future. So thank you guys for that. Thank you for the support of the channel. I can't thank you guys enough on that. But if you can't give a lot to these organizations, give a little. And if you can't give anything at all, at least give us a like and subscribe, because it helps us reach more people. And if you guys are enjoying what you're seeing and you think it's worthy, it's worth, sharing with your friends, let your friends know about us. Because the more people that can come here, they get to enjoy the news the way we do it, but also the more people that'll be here and the larger impact we can make on people's lives globally. And so with that, there's a ton of news to go through today, and so we're going to jump right in. And so we have a couple of different points coming out of Kyiv today. So the first thing is that the Ministry of Intelligence, this is absolutely mind-boggling. So this is the Ukrainian Ministry of Intelligence. They got the bridge plans for the Crimean Bridge, and they released them publicly. So this is their official website. This is the official website. Y'all translate to English for y'all. This is the main intelligence director of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. And this is their notice regarding the fact that they have, declared the guaranteed safety of the Crimean Bridge. And then all of a sudden, we can go to the document which is attached, which in case, this got hit with a Russian cyber attack, I actually pulled anyway. This is on a Google Doc drive. So this is the plans for the Crimean Bridge. It's in Russian, so you'll have to get it translated. But there are things out there on the internet, because Google is the holder of all knowledge, and you can do that even if you don't speak Ukrainian, or even if you don't speak Russian, and you don't, there's tools. We use them here too. But here you go, all the stamps, all the contract information. You just keep scrolling, and there's 242 pages of information here, guys. It is massive. It's a massive document, but everything you need to know. You want to talk about the limits, what they can take, what it can't, every angle needed on this, the entire structural plan for the bridge. Let's see if we can jump down here to some more interesting stuff. Where are we at? There's all the specs that you could ever want. It's just pages and pages. Look at this. Outlines for the bridge. Surveys, topographic surveys, angles, stabilization, the beam placements, what kind of beams they need to use. Everything is in this. do with that information as you do so please. And with that, we're going to continue down. There is a little bit less of happy news here, unfortunately, though, because unfortunately, this is coming from Svitlana Straseva, and this is the Deputy Director of the Department of Housing Policy and Improvement. And they have said that, and I quote, "Since the beginning of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, Russian aggressors have either destroyed or damaged about 116,000 residential buildings in Ukraine." 116,000 residential buildings. So we're not just, because that includes a lot. That includes people's homes, and you know, that's not just one person. You know, that not every house just has one person in it. I mean, that's families. That also includes apartment blocks. Dozens of people. And families. Their lives destroyed by the war. And as we jump down here, however, it's a little bit of the meeting of the minds in Kyiv today. So we talked about this today. So Chancellor Scholz of Germany, President Macron of France, Prime Minister Draghi of Italy, and the President of Romania, Ioannis, all met with President Zelensky today in Kyiv. And so we said that they did announce this yesterday, that they would be doing this. They visited sites from ongoing war crimes investigation. They went to Bucha. They had multilateral in-person discussions regarding the support that's needed. When I was talking about yesterday, I was like, I really hope they break through some friction. There appears to be some friction broken here. And not only that, but a very strong statement actually coming out today. All 4 countries stated that they would, during a joint press conference, that they will be supporting Ukrainian EU candidacy as well. So that essentially, that with that big of a thing. So this is from the Ukrainian Parliament's official Twitter, and this is from Emmanuel Macron, President of France, during the press conference with President of Ukraine, Chancellor of Germany, and Prime Minister of Italy, and President of Romania. And this quote is, "The 4 of us will support granting EU candidate status to Ukraine." So, pretty big news. I mean, you talk about major political backing within the EU. That's pretty significant backing. But these leaders have drawn some criticism, Scholz especially, regarding, you know, the lack of vehement support. It seems, right? Like, there's a lot of apprehension towards wanting to send certain things to Ukraine. You know, they've done a major shift in policy, but is it enough? That kind of thing. And there's always been some apprehension there, and it's really had some pretty negative effects on the relationship between Germany and Ukraine, and actually also a little bit of negative effects within NATO, and some frustrations in trying to get cooperation done. But this is a picture from Bucha today. The faces say it all. That's what you have to understand. We hear these speeches, we hear the rhetoric, we see the press conferences and the press briefings, and we hear the statements, and we read the transcripts, and we can do everything and all of the political whatever, right? All of this, you know, whatever they're saying and has been written and reviewed by dozens of people before it even made it to the hands of this individual who made some last edits before in order to fit the way they do things. Because that's how that, you know, behind the scenes when it comes to politics with speech writing goes. There's an entire profession of speech writers. What you can't fake is someone's personal expression when they're not you know, giving a speech. This is not calculated. It's very much the same kind of, this has the same depth of feeling as when Zelensky visited Bucha. So You can't fake something like this. And this says more than any speech or rhetoric ever will. When they say a picture's worth 1,000 words, they truly do mean it. And once again, you can see all of the leaders here together. This is from the defense, or the Ministry of Defense in Ukraine. So, but very, very major political meetup. I mean, this has been a major diplomatic mission. These are very high level. I mean, Chancellor Scholz, they've been wondering when he's going to go to Kyiv for some time now. This is a very high level, very major diplomatic mission that's been going on here. And hopefully, now that the rhetoric, now that this has happened, hopefully we will see some shifts in policy and shifts in understanding going forward. And that's really what this was about, and hopefully the results come from this as well. As we jump up here, unfortunately, to the Sumy Oblast, so we haven't heard a lot out of Sumy. After the Russian forces withdrew from Sumy and Chernihiv and Kyiv, we didn't really hear anything. Unfortunately, however, there was shelling in Sumy today. Actually, a Ukrainian dairy and cattle farm was hit with shelling. Out of all things, they shelled the farm. It injured several animals and destroyed parts of their barns, pens, and other farming infrastructure. But this is one of the cows, unfortunately, that was hit with shrapnel. And it came right through the roof and landed right in their pens. So, yeah, nothing escapes war. Animals especially. We talk a lot about humans, but you gotta think, everyone's pets, farm animals, I mean, natural wildlife. How many? I mean, I love animals, and so you got to think. You talk about human life a lot, but life is just lost in general. War is just not a good thing in general. It's a very terrible thing. As we go over into Lysychansk, we actually go back to the human life segment of that, and that's because Russian forces reportedly carried out airstrikes within Lysychansk, according to the Ukrainian Ministry of Internal Affairs, killing at least 4 people that they have thus far recovered from the rubble. And so this is from their official Twitter. Lysychansk is under pretty much constant bombardment at this point. Russian forces have pretty much shifted as their forces have been pushing through Severodonetsk. They have essentially shifted their fires and on a further target, and that basically puts Lysychansk, which doesn't even have Russian forces really putting pressure on it yet, to fall under that barrage at this point. And as a result, there's been some pretty bleak news coming out of the Lahansk region. This is coming from Sergei Haida, who is the head of the Lahansk Regional Military Administration. He's also the governor of Lahansk, which is why he's in this position. He says, since the beginning of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, Russian aggressors have either destroyed or damaged 113 schools and 38 hospitals within the Lahansk region. The press service of the Lahansk Regional Military Administration stated that since the beginning of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, Russian aggressors have destroyed more than 11,000 residential buildings in the Lahansk region. So out of the 116,000, 11,000 are in Lahansk alone. However, the top general of Ukraine did give an update on what's happening. So he stated that that defending Severodonetsk is imperative. That they are doing their best to defend Severodonetsk, but they also stated that the Russian it's been rather difficult. Russian forces are currently apparently fighting them on 9 axes of advance at this point. So there are 9 different points in the Lahansk region where Russia is currently bearing down and trying to outmaneuver against Ukrainian troops. So that is currently the situation. However, there is some good news when it comes to the war, and that's because this city is not super close to the front lines. This is pretty far behind the lines, actually. But this right here, a Russian ammo dump was actually destroyed here. So it's an ammunition depot. The Ukrainian forces successfully hit it with something. We don't know what, but whatever it is, it's very long range and it's a very precise weapon system. So we actually Russian forces caught the initial blast on video. So let's take a look.
Вот это, блядь, осколочки летят. Ой, блядь, ну нахуй, пойду обратно, блядь. Ну его в очку, блядь. Ебать, опять что-то прилетело, блядь.
First of all, that man probably now needs a change of shorts. And second of all, someone please cue the Discovery Channel commercial Boom Diata. Amazing, amazing Discovery Channel commercial. Fits for a lot of situations such as this one. As you can see, that's a pretty big explosion. And we can see here it is indeed. So just take a look at this. This is the aftermath following the explosion. And this is where everything is cooking off. Not that it seemed to be much left. So rather large explosions. I mean, just look at that. And that's also what I mean. That also illustrates that a large enough explosion will cause a mushroom cloud. I think that's kind of a big misconception. So this thing rolls up here. You can see that mushroom cloud start to go up. Any explosive large enough will do this. So while everyone associates mushroom clouds with nuclear weapons, that's not the case. It's just because a nuclear weapon is a really big explosive, so it does this. But anything big enough will cause a mushroom cloud. In fact, the MOAB and the FOAB will actually do this as well. So you might be looking at this video and thinking maybe some of the videos actually screwing up a little bit. I can see where that may come in, but actually you'll see these little things of light just kind of randomly throughout the frame. That's actually a tracer round. Now, here's the thing. This is extremely dangerous. Anyone living in or around this area, you got to think this is. It's not in the chamber of a rifle, right? It's not in the breech of an artillery gun. This stuff is just laying out there. It's getting hot enough that it's just going off. It's setting itself off. It's a sympathetic detonation. It's a cook-off. And this stuff is going to go in whichever random direction it feels like. And it's extremely dangerous for the civilian population. Because even these tracer rounds that are going way out there and just seem to be going out in the air, those have to land somewhere. So, if this is nothing else, once again, don't put your military targets inside of a city. Actually, it's against the Geneva Convention to do so, which we've already talked about on this channel, and I brought up the articles to show it, including the entire 1948 Geneva Convention, all 3 protocols. So, don't put your big ammunition depot with a lot of stuff that can explode and kill people in the middle of a city. First of all, it doesn't matter because they have precision fire. That because Ukrainian forces have precision fires and aren't relying on just massive bombardments that you could already just call a war crime. No, they have precision weapons, precision guided munitions that's going to put a round right in the center of your ammunition depot and blow it all to hell. Just stop doing it. Put it in the brush somewhere. I'd keep it in Russia. It's just better to just keep it in Russia. Seriously. Guys, don't even bother firing it. You're already losing the war. And as we jump over here, hate and discontent is really the best two words to describe this. So this is just a Ukrainian soldier. He's actually showing off the massive stockpile of 155 shells that they've given, that the U.S. and other NATO partners have given them. And they're just ready to go. They're ready staged ammunition. Most of them have their caps off. Most of them already have everything primed and ready to go. And so, yeah, I mean, these guys are going to probably shoot all of this in a single day. On average, Ukraine is shooting between anywhere from 4,000 to 6,000 rounds of ammunition, 155 ammunition a day. Now, Russia is throwing between 2 to 10 times more. Estimates are pretty varying on that. But they, the 36,000 rounds of 155 ammunition we were just talking about yesterday is going to last them about a week. So these guys will probably shoot all of this in a single day. And that's a lot of hate and discontent going downrange.
Короче, блядь, я не знаю, это пиздец. Ну, это, сука, такой факел сегодня будет, ёбнутый. Ну, бля, я хуй его знаю. Короче, блядь.
Yeah, that's a lot of steel you're gonna put down on Russian positions. So jump over here, we can see a very lucky Ukrainian soldier too, because he's over here. He's recording in his trench earlier this evening, and a Russian shell landed directly behind him. He was not injured at all, however. So let's take a look. I do not encourage this behavior. If you're in an active war zone, listen, there's a time and minute for everything. If you're laying down in your rack, you know what? Have a video, be on your phone, whatever, right? But if you're out there in the trench, like, not the time or the place, guys. I get it. It's cool. It also makes for really cool footage like this for the news, but if you're doing this kind of stuff, it's just not a good idea. It's not worth risking your life because, come on, man. But yeah, I do not encourage that behavior whatsoever. Much like the Russians drinking on post, but that's a whole different story. Well, we can see that they may not be the only ones, because these Russian pilots got shot down because they were flying over here in the Zaporizhzhia Oblast, and this is actually some footage coming from the Azov Regiment here in the Zaporizhzhia Oblast. They shot down a Russian Mi-24 Hind helicopter gunship, and it was I don't think either of them. I don't think the pilot nor the gunner survived this one. Let's go and take a look. So you can see it. It's flying pretty low to the ground. There's been some pretty poor footage of this one too. Flying pretty low on the ground, but someone's going to get a lock on because it's these open fields. There it goes. Looks like it struck directly into the engine. It rolls over and slams into the ground. Now, it's not exactly easy to bail out of to make a helicopter you can bail out of. I don't think there is one, but even if they had a chance, I don't think even if there was a possibility of bailing out, they didn't really have a chance to. As you jump over here, new optics for Ukrainian troops. So these are new thermal optics that troops on the front line are starting to get. And this is going to put them on a massive advantage over Russian forces. Really, Russian forces are really only employing bare-bone iron sights. They do not have the optics to really outfit a large majority of their forces with actual optics to fire at range. So that really limits them. Your average engagement takes place within about 300 meters. So that's because the AK, which is the most common form of rifle used, military service rifle used throughout the world, has an effective range of about 300 meters for a point target. Your average M4 or M16 will have about an effective range of about 500 to 550 meters for a point target, meaning that what you're pointing at, you will hit. So that's why having optics like this is going to put you at the advantage. Having optics in general, because you're going to be able to push that range further and further out. Because past 300 meters, it's very difficult to actually line up with iron sights. And really to be effective on target, you're going to need an actual optic. But these ones are even cooler because they're thermal. So these are short-range thermal optics that can be used. It mounts right onto a Picatinny rail, and they can switch between different modes. And it doesn't matter if you're sitting in the brush, you have a heat signature, you're going to be spotted. So a big advantage, especially for things like night operations. So take a look.
Під'їхала обновочка, такий тепловізійний коліматорний приціл. Можна працювати як днем, так і вночі. Вон, чувачки ходять. Оце свої. Є зум. Можна виставити ось так от. Трошки ближче. Ну, скажу так, що штука реально класна.
Obviously someone sped that up, but yeah, so right now it's just a couple dudes over there, but I mean, you're kind of screwed now if you're doing night fighting, because the Russians don't even usually have like night vision. Ukraine they are getting night vision devices, like the PVS 14s, and so they're already at a disadvantage, and now these thermal optics are coming in. That's really going to put you at a disadvantage. Because even night vision isn't all that great all the time. All night vision does is amplifies the light that's around you, because even at night there is some kind of light. So if it's extremely dark, it's a new moon, and there's no light sources around you, you seriously cannot see anything, even with night vision on. So having thermal optics like this means there's nowhere to hide. You cannot hide from it. So then that's also, those infrared imaging is the same kind of stuff that gets put into a lot of, especially Western anti-tank missile systems. So specifically for that purpose. Jump down here into Mediupl, where it's some rather very somber sights. And that's because residents are having to wash their clothes in craters filled with water. There's a cholera epidemic in Mediupl. I saw some very grotesque images today of where, even though they're cleaning up, they're still living in houses that have, unfortunately, human body parts strewn on some of the higher to reach places where it's not very easy to clear out. Very just terrible situation to be in, period. But apparently also parents of children who are still speaking Ukrainian are receiving threats, and Ukrainian has actually been removed from all of the school textbooks, and from our understanding, they're using any Russian textbooks that there are available. But take a look at this. So this is the Russian occupants of Mediupl prohibit children from speaking Ukrainian in schools, threatening that there will be consequences for them if their parents if they hear someone speak Ukrainian. So that's come from Anastasia Lapetina, who's an independent journalist. And here, it's the 21st century. It's a modern industrial nation. And you have to clean your water, or you have to clean your clothes in water collected in a bombshell crater. Mediupl has absolutely no necessities. There's no gas. There is no electricity. There's no heat. There's no plumbing. And with no plumbing means no fresh water, no sanitation. Mediupl is essentially a city of nothing but death. But that actually wraps up everything inside Ukraine. But as you can tell, there's a lot of stuff regarding Ukraine all around the world right now. So we're actually going to go ahead and jump up here into Moscow. We have a couple different points. So Moscow appears to be looking to cut ties entirely with the EU at this point. In fact, this is coming from the Russian envoy to the UN, where he stated, in the light of the EU's explicit enmity to Russia, its lack of independence and its subordination to the US and NATO, we have no other choice but to reconsider our fundamental approaches to furthering relations with this entity. He went on to say that it's a shame because they believe that because it was only about a few years ago they saw the EU as an important partner. Also, many have reported at this point that CocaCola is pulled out of Russia officially, which is nice. CocaCola is actually one of my favorite drinks, so I'm really happy to see that they're no longer supporting basically a terrorist state at this point. But it's one of the largest soda manufacturers in the world, and they've officially pulled out of Russia. Big enough news that it hit RT pretty quick. This is RT, their state-affiliated media, Russian state-affiliated media source. Basically, they're run by the government. All distributors are in the process of running down the warehouse products within the country, so they're going to have to find alternatives for that too. But that's not the only thing. This is the official press release from Coca-Cola itself regarding its withdrawal from the country of Russia. So I actually went and pulled this as well, just so I could show that this is the full source. They have the full release in a PDF as well. So pretty big news, at least for more companies are starting to pull out of Russia, which is always nice to hear. This is also coming as they're saying that their sanctions are having no impact on their economy whatsoever at a higher than 15% inflation rate. Lavrov gave another interview today reiterating most of essentially his talking points. And I'm talking Western pressure, distaste for Western rhetoric, mercenaries, propaganda. I don't even think he says Nazis this entire time, which is absolutely mind-boggling for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But let's go ahead and take a look.
Знаете, мы не вторгались в Украину. Мы объявили специальную военную операцию, когда у нас уже не осталось никакого способа объяснить Западу, что он занимается преступной деятельностью. Втягивая Украину в НАТО.
Послушайте, что говорит Верховный комиссар ООН по правам человека. Она недавно, в мае выступала, да? Она сказала, в селе Ягодное Черниговской области российские военные 28 дней удерживали 360 человек, в том числе 74 ребенка и 5 людей с инвалидностью в подвале школы, без туалета, без воды. 10 пожилых людей умерли. Это борьба с нацизмом?
Знаете, к сожалению, и международные чиновники, включая Верховного комиссара по правам человека, включая, к огромному моему сожалению, генерального секретаря ООН и многих других представителей Организации Объединенных Наций, подвержены давлению Запада. И очень часто выступают рупором тех фейковых новостей, которые распространяет Запад.
То есть, получается, опять Россия белая пушистая, да? То есть...
Нет, Россия не белая, не пушистая. Россия такая, какая она есть. И мы не стыдимся показывать себя такими, какими мы есть.
По поводу британцев, которые недавно были приговорены к смертной казни, поэтому в глазах Запада Россия несет ответственность за судьбу этих людей. Вы не считаете, что этот смертный приговор...
Меня глаза Запада не интересуют вообще. Меня интересует только международное право. По международному праву наемники не являются комбатантами. Поэтому что у вас в глазах, откровенно говоря, не имеет значения.
Они не наемники, они служили в украинских вооруженных силах.
Это должен определить суд.
А вы считаете, что там независимый суд? Да.
Я убежден, что там независимый суд. А вы считаете, у вас независимый суд?
А вообще по поводу отношений с Великобританией сейчас, да? Они, сказать, что они плохие, это, конечно, мягко сказано.
Да вы знаете, по-моему, там уже нет никакого поля для маневра в этих отношениях.
А как вы...
Потому что и Джонсон, и Трасс заявляют публично, мы должны победить Россию, мы должны поставить Россию на колени. Ну давайте, ставьте.
А как вы видите Великобританию сейчас? Как Москва видит?
Страна, которая пытается в очередной раз принести в жертву интересы своего народа амбициям политиков, которые думают только о следующих выборах и больше ни о чем.
A little bit longer of a video than what we normally play, but I think it's worth seeing what he's actually saying. And this is a BBC interview that they conducted. And it's a lot of the same stuff we've heard, right? A lot of, the UN is, the UN is all, it's all being pressured by the West, right? It's just to amplify their fake news, propaganda. They're sacrificing their own interests. They were mercenaries, which is, we've disproven a lot of this already, just here on the channel, and that's the thing is, we have a bias for Ukraine. That should be plainly stated. It has been plainly stated, but for those that may just be joining us, we try to stay as unbiased as possible, but when it's so blatant like this, and there's no moral way of supporting Russia whatsoever in this conflict, then we had to come out and say it. And we do have a bias for Ukraine, and that's based off of evidence. It's not just, because listen, we do the news, we don't watch the news. We do it, and you're only seeing maybe 25% of what's out there when it comes to here on the channel, because the fact is, a lot of it is gore, a lot of it is bloodshed, a lot of it is pretty horrendous war crimes that get very up close and personal, a lot of it is casualties, and that's just not stuff that we can show on YouTube. But when you see it every single day, hundreds of times a day, and as someone who has gone through, has read the Geneva Conventions, has read all of the protocols adopted for the Geneva Conventions, has shown on this channel and taken out the Geneva Conventions and shown what is customary international humanitarian law, what is the Geneva Convention, what articles they have broken, how many times they have broken them, you can't support it. And I've also very plainly also stated that Ukraine is not, there's no innocence, okay? There is no innocence. But the amount of times that we have seen Russia do it, and at such a it's an industrial systematic scale of committing war crimes. A massive industrial, it's not just there's the bad eggs. It's a massive industrialized machine of committing war crimes and killing people, and I cannot, in any good conscience, support that. I'm willing to put up with tragedy and mark a lot of things off to that, but I cannot support just absolute blatant war crimes. And Ravish Chiang said, yeah, as I said yesterday, mentioned the folks being brainwashed thought the others were being brainwashed. Well, funny enough, in the words of Lenin himself, you say a lie enough times and it becomes the truth. And I think that's kind of what the Russian game plan is at this point. So, I was kind of getting frustrated earlier going through the Russian sources because you have to understand. I mean, I'm never going to say the West is perfectly great in anything it does, because trust me, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and everything had plenty of controversy to go behind them. There's been a lot of wars, Vietnam, Korea to an extent, like. Everything has controversy in it. Like the Allied powers during World War II, no matter how noble the cause was, there are still horrendous atrocities committed on both sides. I mean, the mass execution of POWs when it comes to the Allies. Several different incidents. But when you're talking about a country who, as the Soviet Union said for essentially 80 years that they were going to take over the world, and now suddenly they're not the Soviet Union anymore, but they're still doing the same things the Soviet Union did. And it's the parallels for history. I mean, history isn't just nice, neat chunks, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. Everything kind of runs together And it's just an overall terrible situation government-wise. I just don't understand the pushback. I mean, you said for 80 years you're going to take over the world, and now you've started an invasion, and everyone in the world went, wow, we were right to fear them for 80 years. And he's not the only one making some very interesting statements, because the state Duma also made some very interesting statements. So this is directly off of their website. And they've said, so this is the chairman of the Russian Duma. This is the head of the Russian Duma, which is their parliament. This is their Congress. This is their legislature. I'm going to read this because it blows my mind. Chairman of the state of this. So this is from their website, duma.gov.ru. And it said, Chairman of the State Duma commented on the recent division and renaming of Yuri Gagarin Avenue in Kyiv after the American astronaut Neil Armstrong. So, Volodin posted on his Telegram channel that Ukrainian authorities, after the 2014 coup d'etat, had been rewriting history consistently. Students were being told that there's no such war in Ukraine as the Great Patriotic War, only World War II. People should celebrate Victory Day on May 8th instead of May 9th, just as people do in Western states. And the symbol of victory, the ribbon of St. George, was banned, and those people who wear it are prosecuted, according to the chairman of the State Duma. He added that such Nazi organizations as the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists and the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, banned in the Russian Federation, were being glorified. The neo-Nazi regime had destroyed the history of its people and turned Ukraine into a U.S. colony. There's no such thing as the Great Patriotic War, just World War II. I'm going to let that one sink in. World War II didn't happen, guys. It was just the Soviet Union. It was just alone and unafraid, with the first man with the rifle and the second man with the ammunition, charged through Stalingrad straight to Berlin. No help from the Allies, just their victory in World War II. No other Axis power, just the Nazis too, just the Germans. We're gonna circle back around to this point here a little bit later, but this is the lead guy that's writing legislature in Russia, and a U.S. colony at that. If it was a U.S. colony, they'd speak English, not Ukrainian. Like every other imperial power ever, they still speak French in parts of Africa. English is essentially the largest spoken language in North America. The second being Spanish, neither of which are indigenous to the actual nations that currently speak them. So, we're just gonna roll past this at this point. I think I've hammered that point home probably a little too much. As we run up here, we actually have an update. So, Germany's gas supply was cut by 60%. We now know why. Because the largest gas field and the Yamalo Nenets Autonomous Okrug, which is basically an autonomous region within Russia in the Siberian plains, their largest gas field had a fire break out. A 1,400 millimeter pipe burst. Take a look. I guess it wasn't politically led, but anyone want to grab marshmallows? Because that's a roasty fire. That's a problem. Yeah, so not good. Not good at all with Russia right there. So that's why Germany no longer has gas supplies right now. If we jump over here into the rest of Europe, into Western Europe, I should say. NATO may be beefing up some of its defenses. It looks like they're going to be changing up their defensive strategies, their defensive model, and the tensions continue to as these contentions continue to rise with Russia. NATO, I mean, Russia's backed into a wall, and animals are most dangerous when they're corralled into a corner. So you're starting to see a shift in their defensive strategies, and they're talking about deploying more battle groups and also deploying them heavily into the Baltic regions, which are especially at risk. So that's currently the situation. We're hearing this from Bloomberg, so if you guys want to go check out more on that, you certainly can. But NATO, that's kind of NATO's stance right now. They officially stated earlier this year that they would not be changing their defensive strategy, but they would be activating their readiness force for the first time, which they did, and that in turn frees up a lot more forces and a lot more flexibility in the deployment of those forces within the alliance. Another point with Russia. This one's pretty interesting, though. A Russian spy attempted to join the International Criminal Court, where all of the war crimes information that's been going on in Ukraine, all of the investigations, and everything else is going to The Hague at the International Criminal Court for trials once the war is over. An international criminal court caught the Russian GRU spy who tried to infiltrate the court as an intern. He was deported. If he had succeeded, he would have been able to gather intelligence there and to look for or recruit sources and arrange to have access to the International Criminal Court's digital systems. He might have been able to influence the criminal proceedings inside of the International Criminal Court. He was posing as a Brazilian national. And this is the General Intelligence Service of the Ministry of the Interior Kingdom Relations. So, pretty impressive. And this is all of their they released all of this guy's information, accompanying notes with the Russian intelligence officer's cover identity, and enclosed document with cover identity for the Russian intelligence officer, enclosed with cover identity of Russian intelligence officer, Portuguese version, Dutch version. You want to read it? It's here. No problem. So, yeah. So Russia failed at that. Pretty funny, but still, could you imagine if this was successful? And how many war crimes has Russia committed? And he has access to a database. I guess I just accidentally hit the delete button on some of this. That's a big deal, and that should be a very telling sign. When you want to interfere with the International Criminal Court, you may have done some things wrong that you may not want the world to know a lot about. And these trials, I have a feeling, are going to be a very public thing, similar to what we saw at the end of World War II. Down in Paris, the Armenian and Azerbaijani tensions have actually spilled over into Paris with some violence. Representatives of the Armenian diaspora in France attacked the cultural center at the embassy of Azerbaijan. The vice president of France-Azerbaijan Dialogue, Associate Eitan Muradova, was injured. So those tensions are there. They don't just exist within the country. So, very interesting tidbit of news there. So, So it got brought to my attention regarding the fact that I said that it's most widely spoken, the widely spoken languages and everything else. So, I want to clarify something. The U.S. actually doesn't have an official language. Oh, so when I say it's a very widely spoken language, English is the most commonly spoken, language inside the United States. The second being Spanish. Chinese is pretty up there as well as Chinese companies, and so is French, but English is just the most commonly spoken. U.S. doesn't actually have any official language in the country. It's just the widely spoken thing because, well, after the 7 Years' War, also known in the United States as the French and Indian War, the British kind of took over everything in North America. So that's why. Anyway, jumping down here, the Ministry of the Armed Forces in France actually asked for their partners to step up weapons production and to possibly prepare for wartime production measures. So that means that France is readying to start producing things at an industrial level to supply them, to supply themselves, to supply NATO countries, and to also supply Ukraine with a massive influx of industrial. I mean, this is a country that is willing to put itself into a state of war, essentially at this point, industrially. I mean, this would be probably one of the first times since. This would probably be the first time since World War II that France has actually put itself into wartime production measures. So that's a pretty massive boost. So they have told their partner, the defense companies, including Nexter Systems, who developed the Caesar self-propelled howitzer, to step up weapons production and possibly prepare for wartime production measures. That's a pretty big increase when you're talking about the production of weaponry and equipment and ammunition. And in Vienna, the Russians. More rhetoric from Vienna. Vienna is where the Russian delegation for arms control is actually posted, and they posted some rather atrocious things on Twitter today. So these are both from their official Twitter pages. And this one is regarding history. That would be the German occupation within Ukraine during World War II. Sat next to Chancellor Scholz, who during his speech today stated, and they circled it in red, Slava Ukraine. Once again, this is an official, and I highlighted here because even Twitter recognizes it. This is an official Twitter page for Russia. It's been 80 years. The war, you literally celebrate defeating the Nazis every single year, with the exception of the one time you tried democracy in the 90s and it didn't go very well because you found out democracy was actually hard. That's blows my mind. Why would you do this? There is no reason to do there. Chancellor Scholz isn't a Nazi. No one in, I shouldn't say no one, because neo-Nazis exist in every country in the world, including Russia. But Germany's been a pacifist country since World War II. They're a pacifist country. They have been. This is the first time they've kind of 180 on their policy regarding pacifism because the war was that bad. The war in Iraq and Afghanistan went on for 20 years. 20 years. Worldwide, serious, extremist terrorism that every major country, to include Germany, saw as a big enough issue to mobilize their military forces to deal with. And they were still a pacifist country. Until this extremist terrorism globally, it was not bad enough for Germany to mobilize a larger military force. It took a major war in Europe, the first one since Germany lost the last one. But it gets even better. Because as I was saying earlier, we have brought up the 1948 Geneva Convention. That's actually the fourth Geneva Conventions. We've also brought up all 3 of the articles that were accepted in the 70s and the 80s for the Geneva Convention. On this channel, we pulled the articles out of them. We also pulled up customary international humanitarian law, all of the rules associated with that. We have pulled up every article that we could find regarding things happening in Ukraine with footage to prove, to show you on here it was happening and why it wasn't okay, why it broke the Geneva Convention. We went through, we had a thorough explanations on all of them. I did 15, 20, 30 minutes a piece on them. Direct and public incitement by the West to the genocide of the civilian population of Donbass, as well as complicity in through the provision of military assistance to Ukraine, entails harsh measures in the accordance with Article 3 of the 1948 Genocide Prevention Convention. At the very least, there's a very strong argument for ethnic cleansing when it comes to the war in Ukraine. At the very least. And if not, for genocide under the acts of the Russian invasion. That is what is being investigated by the International Criminal Court. This was the reasoning. This is, according to them, the reasoning, the denazification and the stopping of genocide against Russian-speaking people, which is exactly the exact same thing Germany stated when they wanted to take the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia. Lebensraum. We've seen the mass execution of civilians. We've seen the use of incendiary munitions on civilian populations. We've seen the use of incendiary munitions on military personnel. We've seen cluster bomb usage. We have seen extensive use of booby traps and landmines. We've seen massive shelling and disregard for civilian infrastructure. Mediupl is gone. Severodonetsk is gone. Rubizny is gone. Popasna is gone. Bucha might as well be. Borodyanka might as well be. Kharkiv is still getting shelled, and it has no military, tactical, or strategic importance anymore. They just fire ballistic missiles at it to do so. And they waited. They waited an entire week. They waited an entire week after they finally got the last people out of the metro to stop living in the metro tunnels as bomb shelters, and then they started firing missiles at it from Belgorod in Russia because their normal artillery can't reach Kharkiv. Consequences to the shelling of the DPR last week. Now, is it possible that Ukraine is shelling Donetsk? Yes. There's also evidence that it's Russia shelling their own people. To be fair, also, Russia's also put most of their ammunition depots inside of major cities. We've seen it. We've showed 3 different times where ammunition depots in Donetsk alone have exploded because Ukrainian artillery hit them. Is it a war crime? Yes. Do I support Ukraine in conducting war crimes? No. Not whatsoever. I never could support a war crime. That's why I'm against this. But this genocide of the Russian-speaking population. Mediupl is one of the largest Russian-speaking cities in Ukraine, and it is leveled out of existence. It exists only in name on a map, on my map here. That's it. This city is gone. The only thing you have is Street View, and you have satellite images of what it used to be. Save these pictures, because whatever images come next are probably not going to look very much the same. Because the city is gone. People were buried in their backyards. They were buried in medians. They were buried in children's... The largest Russian-speaking population. One of the largest epicenters of Russian-speaking population outside of the cities of Lahansk and Donetsk, both of which are Russian-controlled. So, yeah. Genocide against the Russian people. I do not know what you call mass graves that include tens of thousands of people at this point, but if it's not genocide, I'm not quite sure what is. I guess I've kind of lost faith on that point. Jump over here to Grozny, because I missed this one here in Russia, and that's because the Chechens offered a trade. Kadyrov, on their news channel, offered a trade for the Azov service dog that was given as a gift to Kadyrov from Chechen forces, who made propaganda in Mediupl while the Russians actually fought the battle. And they said they wanted to trade the service dog for a dog, quote-unquote. Specifically, Ahmed Hiladovich Zakayev. And he is the former deputy prime minister and prime minister of the unrecognized Chechen Republic of Ichkeria. And in 2002, Russia accused him, when he was in exile, of being involved in a series of crimes, including involvements in acts of terrorism. 2002, very interesting time, because the end of the Chechen wars had just occurred in 2000.
Еще одна украинская собака породы питбуль, которая вышла с завода Азовсталь, где вместе с нацистами пережила все то, что пережили они. Эта собака является служебной. Ей официально выдавался продовольственный паёк, и она числилась в штате нацбата Азов. Поэтому у нас есть предложение. Мы проверим, насколько Зеленского беспокоит судьба его военнослужащих. На территории Киева находится другая собака. Преступник и террорист Ахмед Закаев, скрывающийся от правосудия. На руках этого человека кровь мирных жителей, женщин, стариков и детей. Мы предлагаем украинской стороне обменять своего породистого пса Питбуля по кличке Зига на нашу безродную псину дворняжку Зака, которая еще одна...
They used a Snapchat filter. Why do they want him for acts of terrorism? Well, because he was against the Russian control of Chechnya. So, but we just got a comment coming in, or a question rather, from Erevis Chang, who said that wondering if the Azov fighters have been safely exchanged. That is a no. We know that for a fact. The Azov have not been exchanged yet. In fact, their negotiations are still currently ongoing. It's a big part of the Russian and Ukrainian negotiations that seem to continue to not reach to any accords. So, no, they have not. They are still actually in penal colony. If you want to look it up, it's called the Isolation Colony, also known as Penal Colony number 52. It used to be an art depot inside of Donetsk that was later captured by separatist forces in 2014 and turned into a prison camp, which survivors have talked about, similar if not worse than your average filtration camp. Survivors from penal colony number 52 and any escapees have stated that there is systematic deprivation of sleep, lack of sanitation, purposeful lack of sanitation, lots of disease, summarial executions, rape, torture, interrogation, lack of food, lack of water, purposeful starving and dehydration, basically all of that within there. Beatings, I mean, You name it, they do it there. So that is currently where they're all at. So, but unfortunately, no, none of the Azov have been returned. None of them have been exchanged, even though there was supposed to be some kind of agreement beforehand when this happened. Apparently, that obviously fell through, and I don't think Russia's willing to give up that ship. That's kind of why they said that they were going to fight neo-Nazis, and specifically the Azov, who they're a right-wing militia group, essentially, that formed in 2014. And while that has changed a lot since 2014, it hasn't in the eyes of Russia. So when you're talking about the denazification of Ukraine, in the terms of Russia, what they're saying, that's basically their big trophy right now, is we beat the Azov, we have them in custody, Mediupl is ours, the neo-Nazis are defeated, to some extent. It's they don't really want to give that up, because then it undermines everything that they've been saying up until this point, even to their own public, which they would have to tell their public about that. It's such a big deal that they would find out one way or another, and it would be a bad situation if they didn't find a good way to publicly announce it. Jump down here into the Middle East, and I'm just going to hit this one early. Protests in Yerevan. Protests in Yerevan have been happening every single day for the last month and a half. It's the same protests that we've seen. This footage is pretty much the same thing that we've seen for the last month or so. Take a look. Why are there protests? For some of you who may just be joining us, Yerevan is in protest because they are actually still technically at war with Azerbaijan, which is why you're seeing the Azerbaijan and Armenian delegations not really getting along with each other in Paris. The opposition, so the current ruling party in Armenia is expecting those negotiations for peace are currently underway. Armenia and their government are expected to take sweeping concessions, meaning that whatever Azerbaijan puts on the table, Armenia is willing to accept. And the opposition party is not happy about this. So thousands, up to 50,000 protesters in some instances that we have been told at this point have actually taken to the streets within the capital of Yerevan, and they broke it into government buildings. They were outside the presidential compound the other day, blocking roads, having mass marches. We've seen some pretty heated things with the police. That seems to have at least died down a little bit, at least publicly. But there was some violence ongoing there for a while as well. But there's a ton of people who are not happy with the fact Armenia is going to take sweeping concessions. And so that's why they're protesting, because they're protesting the ruling party in general because of this. But it's all sparked because of the peace negotiations between Azerbaijan and Armenia. They don't want to be at war anymore, but they don't believe that Armenia needs to give up, whatever Azerbaijan asks of them. Jump down here into Syria, and we have some updates and we have some new stuff. So the first thing we're going to hit on is, of course, the Russians. So the Russian forces are arriving in Tal Tamar. This is in Al-Hasaka province of Syria. This is in northeastern Syria. The deconfliction lines are blurred now, so that's something I'm becoming a little bit more and more aware of. Last time I was in Syria in 2017 and 2018. I was deployed there with the Marine Corps, and it was a very different situation. The Russians and the Assad regime and their pro-regime militias stayed south of the Middle Euphrates River Valley, which is right here. That's all the green stuff in the center of the country, because if you can't tell, the rest of it is nothing but essentially desert. And then all coalition forces, the Poles, the French, the Americans, the British, anyone else, and as well as the Kurdish fighters, the SDF, and the basically anti-Assad regime fighters, had control of the northern part of the Middle Euphrates River Valley, or the MERV. So that seems to have changed, especially as Russian forces are moving into a base near Tal Tamer. take a look here. And this one, interesting enough, I'm not seeing any invasion markings on it. We have seen a lot of vehicles, Russian vehicles with invasion markings on them from Ukraine. So they have the Z's painted on them. We don't know if that's because there are units that were that took heavy losses in Ukraine and were rotated into Syria, which is a lot less kinetic for them, or if they are units that could be deployed to Ukraine should they need more manpower. This is all under the Russian Southern Command. But if I'm not mistaken, Teltemir has a fob right here. Whoa. Some major fires going on over there. I'm trying to see if I can... Sometimes even on satellite images like this, because some of these bases and outposts have been here so long, you can actually see them on Google Maps. I know of a couple. But I'm not going to expose some of those positions because some of them are American, so I'm not going to do that. But speaking of American, so we actually jump over here. So we actually reported, we were talking about it, and then breaking news came out that that this had happened. We were showing helicopters, American helicopters over Jerusalem. Jerusalem is across the Euphrates River. It's technically on the northwestern side, right there along the Turkish border. One of the reasons I was like, that's kind of weird because it's across the Euphrates, so it's the deconfliction there. And I said, well, the only reason they would probably do this, and the only reason these helicopters specifically, because it was 2 Chinooks and a Black Hawk, would be flying like this, is if they were conducting a major raid against the Islamic State. And it came out then, as we were talking about it, and more details have come out today. A successful raid by coalition forces in Jerusalem, Syria. So, the international coalition announced the capture of a high-ranking Islamic State commander, Hani al-Kurdi, who is an experienced bomb maker, and as a result of a night operation in the village of Al-Qamar, local sources reported that during the operation, the Americans tied up a family living in this village, taking one of the family members named Mustafa. They left the rest. Later, pro-Turkish militants arrived at the scene, arrested the connected residents, cordoned off the area of the operation. It's also noteworthy that Hani, basically this guy, got into a fight with U.S. Special Forces and detained them for some time until he ran out of ammunition, in which case he was arrested. So he's basically hoping to use them as hostages. This is likely carried out by either the ODA, which is Operational Detachment or Alpha, which is the Green Berets, or it would be ODD, which is Operation Detachment Delta, also known as Delta Force operators, who would have been doing this raid. They probably would have had Rangers with them. Pretty cool, though. I mean, I got to be witness to one of these things when I was there. We actually captured the 4th highest ranking officer at the time within the Islamic State while I was there, and so that was pretty cool. Really cool to be a part of. But that's but yeah, I mean, that's pretty good news. So this is Combined Joint Task Force Operation Inherent Resolve, also known as OAR, for immediate release as of today. So the hunches are correct on that. We are correct on that. So when they're talking about the Islamic State, something that you may not know is that the Islamic State is not called the Islamic State there. They are actually called something completely different. They're called Daesh. So that is what you're seeing here, Daesh, Daesh. So that is what the Kurds refer to them. That is what everyone else refers to them as. And so you'll see for units that are rotated into there, they will say that Daesh forces and not the Islamic State. So, pretty cool. Once again, the officials identified detained senior ISIS leader. So, going right into it here, coalition forces will continue to work with our partners, the Syrian Democratic Forces and the Iraqi security forces, including the Peshmerga, to hunt down the remnants of ISIS wherever they hide to ensure their enduring defeat. We officially, in 2017, 2018, officially destroyed what was left of the caliphate in Syria and in Iraq. In fact, their last bastion in Iraq was Al-Qaim, which is right over here. They surrendered it in 24 hours. once the forces had arrived. But yeah, we cleared out the caliphate here. I mean, that was pretty. This was where my cursor is encircled. Is pretty much what was left. It was Deir ez-Zor, and it was Al Qaim, and then some small settlements along the river valley, and we crushed them then. So pretty big news, especially with. I'm really glad we hit the nail on the head with that. So it's nice to see the update and to get that confirmed from the Department of Defense and OIR as well, the Joint Task Force there. Down here in Homs, there was a kamikaze drone strike. So we're not sure exactly who this was. It was likely Iranian militants or pro-Iranian groups. So there are a number of pro-Iranian groups. Iran is looking to expand their sphere of influence. It's really a battle between Iran and Saudi Arabia because they have very different ideologies when it comes to Islam. So it creates a lot of religious tension. And therefore, because Iran is literally a theocracy, meaning their leader is the Ayatollah. He is a leader in Islam. And Saudi Arabia is just a very secular state, very secular government when it comes to that. So they have very different opposing views. They're both vying for power within the region. That's causing some political instability within the region, especially within Iraq, which is caught directly between the two. But that has spilled over into other parts as well, because the expansion of the conflict is usually what happens with this kind of a situation. When I was in Syria, there was reportedly 70,000 Iranian fighters within the country, within different segments and groups, and they were also training pro-Iranian militias. These are exactly similar when it comes to things like Kataib Hezbollah, which would be in Iraq, who are the ones that conducted the Baghdad embassy, the storming of the Baghdad embassy in 2020, or the attempted storming and the protests there. That would be Kataib Hezbollah who led that. You saw their flags plastered everywhere, as well as the peace brigades, which are led by I want to say Ahmed al-Sadr. Last name is Sadr. There's two of them. I can't remember which one. But they had his face plastered everywhere. But very similar here. There's like 40 factions fighting each other inside of Syria. It's a very complicated mess of a situation. There's pro-everyone groups. There's independent groups, terrorist groups, coalition forces, Russian forces. You have democratic forces. You have coalitions within militias. You have all sorts of stuff. Sometimes militias on the same side are fighting each other. We've seen pro-Turkish militias fighting each other, and they're both pro-Turkey. So I'm not quite understanding how that happens, but it does. But apparently none of the militants in this attack were injured, however. But the explosion partially destroyed a building and the fence. And that is some of the photos from last night from where this drone strike occurred. Once again, they're not quite sure who caused it at this point, but they are pretty confident that it's pro-Iranian militias. We drop down here into Damascus, and we can see that Syria is recognizing the LPR and the DPR, which is the Luhansk People's Republics and the Donetsk People's Republics. The self-proclaimed sovereign nations, which are the separatist regions within Ukraine. We refer to them here as the DNR and the LNR because they are not internationally recognized as sovereign nations. I mean, Taiwan's been its own country since the Federalists got kicked out of China by the communists, and that was the 50s, the 40s actually, and they're still not considered a sovereign nation internationally yet. So I'm not buying the LPR or the DPR at all on that. But Assad is essentially a Russian puppet, to say the least. His forces, his forces are just under Russian authority at this point. The Russians are letting up now that the Russians are having to coordinate more with the coalition and the Turks in order to prevent a larger international conflict from arising because of Syria. But especially because Turkey is looking to invade Syria, and the SNA, or the Syrian National Army, is not going to let that happen, which means the Russians kind of have to step aside on that. But other than that, he does basically do whatever. He just follows in the footsteps. There's Syrian fighters actually in the Kherson region. Ukraine confirmed that for us not too long ago. There are Syrian fighters in Kherson because Russia pulled a bunch of Syrian mercenaries to help with the manpower issues, even though I wouldn't trust them within 10 foot of a rifle, let alone on the front lines. But we can see here he actually said that this is the Syrian president. This is Assad himself, by the way. And he said that the U.S. forces control terrorists and neo-Nazis during an interview with TASS. This is the TASS news agency. They are another Russian state-run media agency. So pretty big thing. Russia and Syria are in a battle against the same enemy. Both terrorists and neo-Nazis are controlled by the same country, the United States. The main and the biggest battle is being fought against the policy of imposing hegemony, which is being implemented by the West, which considers itself the center and to seek to rule the world in accordance with its interests. Our countries defend their sovereignty in order to build strong relations with each other in order to help strengthen their own positions and realize the interests of their people. Well, not unexpected. I will give it that much. I kind of expected them to... I honestly expected Syria to do that as soon as the announcement came out from Russia. We jump down here into India, where there's pretty widespread protests currently ongoing because there's a very big change to how the military is recruiting. So people started riots at this page, arson, robbery, and it's because their new military system, only residents between the ages of 17.5 and 21 can be recruits. Only a quarter of them will be able to go on a contract, and the service itself, instead of 17 years, will only last for 4 years. India is going through a lot of growing pains as a nation. The rapid industrialization, food shortages to an extent, massive population growth. They're the second most populated nation on the earth right now, the first being China. And so because of this, that means that there's a lot of economic instability. Militaries usually give economic stability. Actually, in Nepal, for instance, the Nepalese actually have a thing with the British called the Gurkha. The Gurkha is a Nepalese unit within the British Army. They're a special forces unit, actually. And they are recruited by the British Army, and Gurkha veterans receive a pension. And that pension, actually, believe it or not, is the best paying thing in Nepal. It is essentially the stability for the Nepalese because they have a very poor economy. So in countries like Nepal, where that's very common, or where there's a lot of instability, that government paycheck, that government, that being in the military means a level of stability that people otherwise wouldn't be able to afford economically. And so that's why. You see this with other nations. You see this with China too, because it has so many people, so many mouths to feed, economic stability, getting a constant paycheck, being fed constantly by the government. You don't have to worry about where your food comes from. You don't have to worry about getting a paycheck. The government's providing that for you because they're serving in the military. So that's why they're upset. They're not upset because of, they're not upset because people are going to be drafted for longer. It's a mass mobilization. No, they're upset because they wanted to serve in the military, and now that option is no longer available. Yeah, they're burning a train. So, some instability in India because of some changes in policy. Jump up here to North Korea, believe it or not. We're actually going to go over here to Haeju. So, Haeju is kind of one of these coastal regions, and North Korea has reported an outbreak of an unspecified intestinal epidemic in the agricultural region on Thursday. So, today. And this is putting some strain on the country. It's battling chronic food shortages because they have locked down the country and they have a massive amount of COVID-19 infections. Nobody in North Korea is vaccinated. at all. And they have Omicron, which is the most contagious variant of COVID-19 that there is. They went from having their first case to like 1 million cases in like 24 hours. It's insane how widespread this is. It's probably more than whatever has been reported. But they also had like their first death, and then they're up to like several thousand deaths, I believe, the last time we were able to report on it. Kim Jong-un said on Wednesday he sent medicines to the western port city of Haeju to help the patients suffering from acute intestinal epidemic, according to the state news agency KCNA. But they did not give the number or identify the disease. So apparently it's a pretty massive outbreak, considering that Pyongyang is willing to vocalize it. It usually means it's a big issue. Normally those are not small issues. But when North Korea is willing to say something to the wider world. But yeah, so we don't know what it is. Jump down here into Somalia, and that's because a BBC team actually got into the Al-Shabaab basically controlled territories of Somalia. Al-Shabaab is actually the most combat ready. They're the most well-developed branch of Al-Qaeda in the world. So they are rather successful in their endeavors within Somalia, unfortunately. But the British TV channel, Channel 4, was able to go in there and actually take a look. So this is Al-Shabaab. Al-Shabaab, their stuff is going to look similar to the Islamic State. They are not the same thing. I know that's probably different, really, considering this looks like the Islamic State flag. They do not share the same beliefs, though. Actually, Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State are known to not get along. There's actually fighting between Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State in Afghanistan, and also against the Taliban in Afghanistan. But this is them. This is Al-Shabaab. So those are the guys that, when you're talking about terror attacks inside of Somalia, that's who's doing it. Are those guys in those pictures right there. We jump over here. We're going to jump over here into Niger, where there was a terror attack in the Tillaberi region. And this is against the gendarmes, or the gendarmes. 50 of them were unfortunately killed and injured in this attack. The incident occurred on the 14th in the Tillaberi in the southwestern part of the country. They don't know who was behind this attack. They don't know what military group is behind it. The French Ministry of Defense said that the country's Air Force planes launched a series of attacks on terrorists who attacked a convoy of gendarmes in the Tillaberi region. The French also said that the Niger authorities have requested assistance in the elimination of those militants. So while Mali may be giving up the French, Niger is more than welcome, or is more than happy to take the assistance that they can get. And this looks like it's the French report. So, for those that don't know, a gendarme or a gendarmerie is it's pretty much a militarized police. So they're a security service within a country. A lot of former French colonies will have this, but they are basically a really well-equipped militarized police force. They are actually a security force more than a police force at that point, where they do both civil and military operations, and they will basically ensure internal security within a country. It's a very French thing, obviously, just based off of the very word that's being used. But that is what they are. They're just more heavily armed, but they're not the military. They're separate from the military. But that is what you'll see in a lot of former French colonies. Mali, I believe, has gendarmerie. Burkina Faso, Cote d'Ivoire, Niger, I believe Nigeria as well. All of those are going to have gendarmerie. As we move up here into New York, The UN has some more new estimates on the Afghan crisis. So, 93% of Afghan families face food insecurity, and the UN once again drew attention to the humanitarian and economic crisis within Afghanistan. It is a huge crisis. It is insane. People are selling their families. They're selling children. Like, there's just massive human trafficking in Afghanistan because people can't afford to feed everyone in their families. It's the economic. Afghanistan is doing everything it can right now to just not collapse as a country. The Taliban really are doing everything they can to build those relationships much quicker than they were a year ago. And so that's kind of what's happening. As noted, many Afghans are deprived of proper access to medicine. Once again, Afghanistan really doesn't have a lot of very good medical infrastructure to begin with, and now that coalition support is pulled out, as well as any foreign investors, that probably isn't going to improve anytime soon. And according to the World Health Organization, or the WHO, about 18.1 million people are in need of medical care within the country of Afghanistan. So, rather deplorable situation in the country of Afghanistan since the Taliban takeover. Because when the coalition pulled out, everyone pulled out. So you're talking about any infrastructure projects, you're talking about any foreign investment into the country, you're talking about any foreign business, humanitarian aid projects, all of that pulled out. It was because it's too dangerous not to. Couple things out of Washington today. First of all, coming from the Pentagon, Russia, or apparently, according to the Pentagon, Russia has lost between 20 and 30% of its armored forces. That is their total armored forces, their entire strengths. So that includes all of their arms, and this is coming from the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, and also the Joint Chief of Staff, the Chief of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, I should say.
Achieving military effect, shall we say. The Ukrainians, on the other hand, are using much better artillery techniques, and they're having pretty good effect on the Russians. The Russians have lost probably somewhere in the tune of 20 to 30% of their armored force. That's significant. That's huge. So the Ukrainians are fighting a very effective fight tactically with both fires and maneuver, and that's significantly achieving military effect.
It is significant. When he says that's significant, it's like wiping out. I mean, you got to think how many tanks do you see get deployed by the United States? Usually not a lot, right? Tanks are a very expensive asset, and they're a really big asset. You need a tank for a really big fight, and it's really cool to operate with them. I've done it in training. I've never done it in combat, but I've worked with tanks in training, and they're a pretty powerful asset. But 20 to 30% of a country's armored force, that's like wiping out an entire division, like an entire U.S. division's worth of armor. I mean, it's insane. I've never heard of armor losses that high before since like World War II. And I'm talking World War II, like Russia throwing T-26s, which are basically tin cans with a pellet gun mounted in their turret, against Panzers. Like insane, like just insane tactics and losses. It's unfathomable. It's incomprehensible the number of losses that they would have when you're talking about 20 to 30%. And that's not just tanks. That's your BMPs, your BMDs, your MTLBs, your BTR series. You're talking about every single piece of armor that Russia could field, they have lost 20 to 30% of it. Insane. But it's okay, I guess, at least in Russia's eyes, because the Russian embassy in the United States would be giving very poor reviews on Yelp to the various humanitarian organizations in the world. We're just going to take a look at this. This is the official Twitter of the Russian embassy in the United States, and he said, "The so-called human rights activists only serve the interests of the local ruling class. Hence they spread fakes about Russia using cluster munitions against civilians in Kharkiv, which they spell Kharkov, and they turn a blind eye to the shelling of Donetsk residential areas by Ukraine. Fake news of use of... We've geolocated on this channel. We have geolocated to the exact position where there were cluster munitions used. We've shown cluster munitions being used. We've shown saturation bombardments. We've shown it all on this channel, on this very channel. Please go back and watch the history of this thing. We've been reporting just since day 33, so we didn't even start at the beginning of the war. We didn't start at where all of this stuff first started coming out. No, we were at this point. We started on day 33, and there's so much evidence that Russia just says doesn't happen. You can't just say videos, like, if a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? A video is priceless. It's priceless. And Russia is just saying, no, it didn't happen. The videos are everywhere on social media. What do you mean it didn't happen? You had local air supremacy over some of these areas, such as Kharkiv. What do you mean it didn't happen? You're the only one flying in Kharkiv to drop them. Once again, going through the source, we expanded our sources, and going through the Russian sources is a chore, because it's just this over and over and over again, and just nothing but the United States is willing to take over the planet. Now, I'm not going to say the United States doesn't have its own political objectives, because of course it does, otherwise it wouldn't have a purpose. I mean, come on, guys, we're the same country that had Manifest Destiny. Yes, we have engagements to do. Are they just lying, or are they so thoroughly brainwashed? This isn't lying. This is the government. This is the... If this was like your average just like Russian dude on Twitter that managed to be on Twitter because he didn't update his phone or something, right? Because Twitter shut down in Russia for citizens. It's shut down. And basically all Western, they're talking about in Russia, they're so isolated, right, socially in Russia, that they are talking about starting their own internet just inside of Russia, just for Russian citizens. That's how bad it is, right? There is no Twitter for your average person. So this is the government. So it's not some Russian who is just reiterating what he's hearing from the Russian state-run news media channels, because they kicked out all of the independent ones, and then says that the West censors their journalists, which they don't. I'm not censored. I'm a Western journalist at this point, right? So I mean, it's unbelievable, and they're just lying. They really are. They're lying straight through their... I mean, how many times just here? You gotta think how many people are covering this war. This is the most well-documented war in human history. There is no other war in human history where people know more about it at home than this. People talk about the change, World War II at the time, most well-documented war in history. The pictures from World War I, most well-documented war in history. The Civil War, when pictures were very first, really just starting to come to the point where you could use them like that. Vietnam was a huge turning point in journalism and war correspondence. I'm talking, Iraq, the Gulf War, the Iraq War, especially 2003, where every single news agency in the world had someone embedded with U.S. forces. There were journalists that were being killed alongside U.S. forces because they were getting engaged. And now this, because every single person has a cell phone. Every person has a cell phone. So everybody can take a picture. CCTV camera footage, cell phone footage. I mean, people, actual news organizations on the ground. The reports coming from the countries themselves. drones. I mean, people are just taking their quadcopters and filming things from an aerial point of view, something that's never been really done in a modern war. This could have been done if this was the 60s or the 70s. You can't say this, you can't hide it anymore. It's the 21st century. Things are different. But it's the 20th century mentality of the Soviet Union in the 21st century. They're not vying for the Soviet Union, they're vying for the Tsar at this point. They're vying for Imperial Russia. They don't have the same goals. Just some nostalgia within those goals. Jump up here, actually, all the way up to Greenland. So this tiny speck of island here that there isn't really any good satellite imagery for. If I zoom in close enough, as you say, sorry, we have no imagery here. This is Google. Google actually is the world's most renowned cartography service. This is the world's best cartography service. In case you didn't know, Google is officially the world's best cartography service. So, and they don't have an image close enough of this. But this is the Hans Island. It's officially been divided. So this actually ends the Whiskey War. So after 49 years, Denmark and Canada finally divided the island between the two of them. The island is 1.3 square kilometers in total area. But the agreement will increase the volume of trade and investment between the two countries. The dispute was nicknamed the Whiskey War, as Canadian warships would land on the island. They would raise the Canadian flag, and they would leave Canadian whiskey on the island. Denmark would send their warships out there. They would take down the Canadian flag. They would put up the flag of Denmark, and then they would leave their own Scandinavia aquavit. So that's why it's called the Whiskey War, because they would go. That's the island itself, by the way, guys. It's an insignificant rock, and they would go, and these forces would go out there, and they just did this for 49 years. See, this is how a war should be fought, by giving each other whiskey and raising your flag, not with cluster munitions and white phosphorus and war crimes on an industrial genocidal scale. So jump down here, back into Africa real quick, where a lion cub found its mother. So this little lion cub found its mother in the savannah, and it's not known how long this cub wandered by itself. It got away from its pride, but the family actually seems to look rather joyful. Let's take a look. Sorry, I gotta mute that. It's got copyright music, unfortunately, but here's this little lion cub. This is just adorable, guys. I can't help it. Yep, you're mine. And just gonna pick you up. Cats are still cats, big or small. But just a little sweet little... Hey, come on. I love animals. What can I say? I just went on a rant about that not too long ago. But some very big news, and this is a little bit older. I heard about this already a little bit, but this is the San Jose. The San Jose is one of very few treasure ships. So this is a Spanish galleon. The Spanish galleon that sank in 1708. So these are new images on one of the world's most valuable shipwrecks. $17 billion worth of gold, silver, and jewels are currently sitting at the bottom of the ocean with the San Jose. She sank in 1708 after being sunk by British warships. They found the San Jose in around 2,000 feet, or 600 meters below the depths. and that was on June the 6th. So the wreck was only discovered in 2015, and they just now went and they got some images of it. It's remarkably intact. And the UNESCO, or the United Nations Educational, Science, and Cultural Organization, it said, please do not salvage the wreck. But so technically Spain still owns the San Jose, and that's under international law. So until Spain officially decommissions the warship, this goes for British warships as well, until the country officially decommissions the ship and strikes it from the record, they are still belonging, regardless of where they're located, to the nation that they fell under, or that they had their flag under. So very cool. So the Colombian government, of course, being $17 billion worth of jewels and gold and all of that fun stuff, is currently disputing that. So, because it's in their waters. But pretty cool. Let's see. Let's take a look here. So here it is. Here's the images of what's left of the San Jose. I mean, gold everywhere. This right here, the San Jose is a shipwreck finder's dream. Finding a Spanish galleon, even if you just walk away with, a measly 10% of whatever you recover off of a Spanish galleon, people spend there have been generations of people who have spent their entire lives looking for this ship. That is how big a Spanish galleon is. That's how big of a deal something like this is. And also, I love shipwrecks. I love wrecks. Well, not really. The stories are really fascinating. The Titanic, the Edmund Fitzgerald, Truck Lagoon. I love Paul Allen's team out here in the Pacific. They're finding all sorts of stuff. I really want them to go back to Iron Bottom Sound, which is Guadalcanal. Let's see if I can find it. The Solomon Islands. And let's see here. Where's the Guadalcanal? There it is. Just looking over it. So, also known as the Battle of Savo Islands. But if you guys ever want to look into that, but it's known as Iron Bottom Sound because there were so many ships sunk there. That's really cool. Shipwrecks are just absolutely cool. So, pretty big find, and I hope that they can come to an amicable agreement for both Spain and Colombia. But that's actually all of the news for the day. Pretty interesting end to the news, but a lot of stuff going on in the world. I had quite a few rants on this one, especially when it comes to the Russian media and all of that fun stuff. Once again, listen, I'm not here to get political, and I'm not here to get I don't want to get political on a lot of this stuff. We stay out of politics whenever we talk about U.S. and whenever we talk about U.S. politics stuff, big stuff like that. We just say kind of what's going on and don't really go one way or the other. But the war in Ukraine is so apparently horrendous. It's just apparent, the war crimes that are occurring. I've shown it so many times here. I've gone through article by article on some of this stuff with the Geneva Convention and customary international humanitarian law. And I've seen so many deplorable things that I cannot show on here. I've seen it in person enough. It don't really bother me anymore. Except there's an emotional level to where I can't stand the human suffering. The actual images don't bother me, but the thing is that it's not something anyone should see. And that's kind of the situation right now regarding my personal bias with Ukraine. But I hope that you guys enjoy the news. I hope that you guys will forgive me for some rants. It's a very frustrating situation. Once again, misinformation is meant to tug at your heartstrings, right? And that goes both ways. So please be cautious of that when you're talking about some very emotional things. I do try to at least base mine off of the facts that I'm seeing and not on what I'm hearing. So with that, take everything with a grain of salt when you're talking about the stuff that's coming out right now, because it's a very fluid situation and everyone is trying to garner support for something or undercut the support of somebody else. Be very wary. I have an entire thing on our Discord where I wrote up something to kind of help you identify misinformation, what you should be looking for, and kind of what you should be thinking about when you're reading through some of these articles, to kind of be a little bit more methodical. And it doesn't just have to deal with Ukraine or Russia, though that's the main topic, but really take a look at that kind of stuff whenever you're looking at any kind of news, and you may find a different light on it. But other than that, I really appreciate you guys for joining us. Please check out the video description below, because we're doing all of this. I'm getting frustrated over a war and everything, not because it's good for my health, but because I want to be able to help other people who are in a much worse situation than me, to say the least. And those people are people in Ukraine. Those are Ukrainians that had to flee, and there are millions of Ukrainians that are still in the country that are currently suffering every single day. And those are people that are in Ethiopia, in the Tigray region, where 90% of them require humanitarian aid for survival. I'm talking about Somalia. 90% of Somalia is dry. They do not have any water. It's the worst drought in, I believe, 40 years. Iraq is the same way. Major famine, global famine supplies, global food insecurities in general. And we want to be able to help millions of people worldwide. And the only way we can do that is with your support. So please check out the description. Please go in, not just for Ukraine, but for all of these other regions too, because they really don't get the spotlight with the war going on. And there are tens of millions of people suffering in these regions too that we cannot forget about. So please check out everything down there. If you have any more, we're constantly looking for more. Please let us know on the Discord. We would love to get more and vetted on the Discord as well, and added to this description and keep this list going. We're never going to do super chats on this channel. Once we are large enough to actually post fundraisers to the channel itself, we are actually going to be doing that on every single stream. There will be no super chats. I have a full-time job, and everyone here is volunteering our time. We're doing this out of a passion. We're wanting to help people. We're not really in this for the money. And so as we grow, there will be a lot more developments regarding some of that and how we intend to kind of expand on that. But right now, we just want to get large enough so that way we can get the fundraisers actually going just on the stream. But until then, make sure to check out the description. If you can't give a lot, give a little. And if you can't give anything at all, let your friends know about us. Give us a like and subscribe. That stuff helps us reach more people. The more people that are here get to enjoy how we do the news here. But also, more people means a much bigger impact that we can have as a community to help people globally. So thank you for the support. Please give a big thanks to the staff. They're the ones that really put this together. I just lend my voice to this thing. But I really appreciate them. I really appreciate you guys. So my name is Paul from the New News. Have a great night, everybody.